Picture two cucumber patches, side by side. Same seeds out of the same packet. Same sunny fence, same watering can, same Saturday weeding. One is climbing all over that fence by midsummer, heavy with firm, dark green cucumbers. The other just sits there, pale and slow, handing back a few bitter, hollow ones that end up in the compost. Most folks chalk that up to luck or blame the seeds. But spend enough seasons with dirt under your nails, and you start to suspect the truth. The difference is almost never in the plant you can see. It's down in the soil you can't. In whether the ground around those roots is alive and working, or just sitting there holding the plant up. And the thing that turns it around isn't a $40 bag from the garden center. It's about 1 liter of a simple mix you can stir up tonight, from a packet of plain baker's yeast and a scoop of clean wood ash out of the fireplace. I know. Bread yeast on your cucumbers. Stay with me. There's real, published science behind this, including a study done right on cucumbers that I'll get to. But I won't make you wait 20 minutes for the recipe. So let me give you the whole thing right up front. Section 1. DHE method N under a minute. Here's the entire method in under a minute. Then I'll slow down, walk through every step, and explain why each part works. Take 1 liter of warm water, stir in about 10 grams of dry baker's yeast, 1 little packet, and a tablespoon of sugar. Let it sit 2 hours until it's foaming. Then water it down. Sprinkle a thin ring of wood ash around your cucumber plant and pour the diluted yeast solution over the soil. Do that every couple of weeks while the plant is flowering and setting fruit. That's it. 1 liter, a packet of yeast, a spoon of sugar, a little ash, pennies, and 10 minutes of your evening. So if all you came for was the recipe, there it is. Pause and write it down. But if you stay, I'll show you the exact temperature, the right amounts, the one mistake that quietly burns plants, and the surprising reason this works at all. Because once you understand what's happening under the soil, you'll know how to use it on far more than cucumbers. Section 2. WHYCUMBers ARESO needy. To use this well, it helps to know what you're up against, because a cucumber is a surprisingly demanding plant. Think about what it's building. A cucumber is almost all water, around 95% of that fruit, held firm under pressure. So the plant is filling and pressurizing dozens of little water balloons at once, pulling it all up through roots that stay shallow and bruise easily. That's why cucumbers are the first plant in the garden to complain when something's off below ground. The older leaves fade to a tired yellow. New fruit comes out small, or crooked, or pinched at the blossom end like it gave up halfway. Then come the 2 problems that frustrate gardeners most. The first is bitter, hollow fruit. Usually a sign of stress and a shortage of potassium at the worst possible moment. Potassium is the mineral that governs how water moves and how firmly each cucumber fills out, so when it runs short during fruiting, you get soft, hollow, bitter cucumbers. The second is blossom end rot, that sunken, leathery brown patch on the bottom of the fruit. People assume it's a disease and reach for a spray, but it's really a calcium shortage made worse by uneven watering. The plant just couldn't get enough calcium out to the far tip in time, so a good harvest really hangs on 3 things together. Steady water, a steady supply of minerals, especially potassium and calcium, and roots in soil healthy enough to take those minerals up. Keep that little list in mind, because everything in this method aims straight at it. Section 3. TH full recipe, step by step. All right, let's make it properly, the way I'd do it in my own garden. Start with your water, and temperature really does matter. Pour 1 liter, a bit over a quart, into a clean jar, warm to the touch but not hot. Around 95 to 100 degrees Fahrenheit is the sweet spot. It should feel like comfortable bath water on the inside of your wrist. Too hot and you'll cook the yeast. Too cold and it stays sleepy. Stir in about 10 grams of dry baker's yeast, 1 standard packet, or roughly 2 teaspoons, and a tablespoon of plain white sugar until both dissolve. That sugar isn't for your soil. It's breakfast for the yeast, the jolt of energy that wakes those dormant cells and gets them multiplying. Then walk away and let it rest, out of direct sun, for about 2 hours. No heat mat, no special gear, just time. When you come back, look closely, because the jar tells you whether it worked. You want a soft cap of pale foam on top, and that warm, bready, faintly sour smell. The liquid will look a little cloudier. That foam and smell are your proof the leader is now full of living, active yeast. And if you see nothing after 2 hours, your water was likely too hot or your yeast too old, so start fresh. Here's the step people skip, and it's the one that protects your plants. Dilute it before it touches a root. At full strength, it's far too concentrated. Pour about 100 milliliters of your foamy stock, a little under half a cup, into a full liter of plain water. For a whole row, keep the ratio, 1 part stock to 10 parts water. Out to the bed, and timing matters. The best moment is when your cucumbers are flowering and just starting to set their first fruits, because that's when their hunger for water and minerals runs highest. Before you pour, prepare the ground. I loosen the top inch of soil around the plant with my fingers or a hand fork so it can drink instead of shedding water off a baked crust. Then I dampen it lightly. Adding the solution to slightly moist ground lets it soak in evenly instead of pooling against the roots in one strong spot. Next, the ash, and here a light hand matters most. Scatter just a thin sprinkle of clean wood ash in a ring around the plant, and keep that ring a good 4 to 6 inches out from the main stem, or the alkalinity can scorch the tender young roots. With ash, a little does a lot. Finally, slowly pour the diluted yeast solution over that root zone, soaking the soil in the ash ring, keeping it off the leaves. That matters more for cucumbers than almost any vegetable, because wet leaves invite powdery mildew, and these plants are prone to it. And that's the routine. Repeat every 10 to 14 days through flowering and fruiting, and watch how your plants answer. With cucumbers, a gentle, steady hand beats a heavy, occasional one every time. CN4. WHEWIESS really doing, SAS really doing. So that's the how. Now the why. Because it's stranger and better than plant food. That dry yeast is alive. It's a single-celled fungus, Saccharomyces cerevisiae, the very organism the French scientist Louis Pasteur was studying under his microscope in the 1850s when he first worked out how fermentation happens. Every grain in that packet is a crowd of cells, dried down and dormant, waiting on warmth and sugar to bring them back. Here's the part that surprises people. Yeast is barely a fertilizer at all. Read a fertilizer label and you'll see numbers for nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And yeast has almost none of those to offer. So what's it good for? Yeast works as a biostimulant. Those cells are loaded with amino acids, B vitamins, proteins, and enzymes, and around the roots they act like both a meal and an alarm clock for the helpful microbes already living in your soil. You're not really feeding the cucumber. You're feeding the living soil, and healthy soil is what feeds the cucumber for you. There's not much money in that idea, of course. No company gets rich telling you to use a packet of baking yeast and a handful of ash you'd otherwise sweep into the trash. But your grandparents leaned on exactly these resourceful tricks, and it turns out they were onto something real. Section 5. DHE Sucember Studi, that surprised me. And this is where it gets surprising. With a study done on cucumbers, not some stand-in crop in a far-off greenhouse, a plant scientist named Dr. Muwafaq Karaja at Utah University in Jordan ran a careful set of trials, first in a controlled growth room, then out in a real field, to see what ordinary baker's yeast does for cucumber plants. One of the worst enemies a cucumber has is something you'll likely never see, because it works underground: the root knot nematode. These are microscopic worms that bore into the roots and force them into useless knots, slowly choking off the plant's ability to drink. If your cucumbers wilt in the afternoon, no matter how much you water, or just stunt and fade for no reason you can find, hidden nematodes are a prime suspect, especially in warm climates, sandy ground, and beds you've planted year after year. In Dr. Karaja's trials, simply soaking the root zone with a yeast solution knocked that nematode damage down hard. The knotting on the roots dropped sharply, and the worm's ability to breed dropped with it. And here's the part that stopped me cold. That humble yeast drench held its own against a standard commercial chemical built to kill nematodes. Plain yeast and water, going toe-to-toe with the bottle from the store. It wasn't only about pests. In those same trials, the yeast-treated cucumbers grew better and gave more fruit. More cucumbers off the same plant, from a baking ingredient. Then the researchers found the clue to why. Up close, the treated roots were rich with the plant's own natural defensive compounds, as if the yeast had quietly tripped the cucumber's internal alarm and put its defenses on duty. The yeast didn't just feed the plant, it helped the plant stand up for itself. Before we keep going, I've made something to take the work off your plate. Everything in this video, the full recipe, the exact measurements and temperature, the timing, every caution, and the science behind it, I've gathered into one printable blueprint guide. It's made to live on the shed wall or the kitchen counter, so you're not squinting at a screen with muddy hands halfway through. If you'd like it, point your phone's camera at the code on your screen now, and it'll bring up the Rooted Grace Cucumber Blueprint. Free to download and keep. Consider it a thank you for spending this time with me. Grab it whenever you like. Then let's finish the story, starting with that scoop of wood ash. SC 6. THE wood ash health. If the yeast wakes up the living side of your soil, the wood ash takes care of the mineral side. And it's an underrated material most people toss without a second thought. Think about where it comes from. A tree spends its whole life drawing minerals up out of the deep subsoil and storing them in its wood. Burn that wood. The carbon leaves as smoke, but the minerals stay behind, concentrated in the ash. A single scoop holds a tree's lifetime of mineral gathering. The biggest share by far, often a quarter or more of its weight, is calcium, mostly as calcium carbonate. Remember blossom end rot, the calcium problem? This is a gentle, slow-release source of exactly that. Wood ash also carries a useful amount of potassium, usually around 5 to 7%, plus some magnesium and a scattering of trace minerals like iron, zinc, and boron. And that potassium is just what filling cucumbers are starving for. What ash does not have is nitrogen, that all burns away in the fire. So, like the yeast, it's no complete fertilizer. It's a mineral supplement, weighted toward the calcium and potassium that fruiting cucumbers crave. But ash has one more trick, and it's the one to respect. It's strongly alkaline. It raises soil pH much the way garden lime does, pound for pound with roughly half the strength of limestone. On acidic soil, in small amounts, that's a help. On the wrong soil, it's a problem. And that brings us to the part you really can't skip. Section 7. WHYITA all works tother. You may have seen versions of this online that promise some dramatic reaction the moment the liquid hits the ash. A fizz, a flood of nutrients all at once. I'll be straight with you. It doesn't really work like that, and the real explanation is more satisfying anyway. What's happening is two good tools quietly helping each other. The ash gives up its minerals more readily when the ground is moist and biologically active. And the yeast solution is exactly what makes the soil moist and busy with life. So instead of one big burst, you get a slow, steady handoff over days. And there's a deeper payoff to feeding all that soil life. Soil scientists, including the U.S. Department of Agriculture's own conservation service, judge healthy soil partly by aggregate stability, whether it forms loose, spongy crumbs full of pockets for air and water instead of packing into a hard slab. Those crumbs are held together by glues from life itself. As bacteria and fungi feed and grow, they spin out sticky substances and thread-like networks that bind the soil into structure. Feed that underground crowd, and you slowly build the very ground your roots need. Soil that breathes and holds moisture steady between waterings. The calcium from the ash helps here too, coaxing fine clay particles into crumbs instead of a sealed crust. No fizz, no fireworks. Just a quiet partnership, building better soil under your feet. Section 8. DHE Cutians don't skip. Now for the part the short videos skip. The handful of mistakes that can turn this good method against you. This is the line between helping your garden and harming it, so don't tune out yet. Most important, test your soil's pH before you ever add wood ash. A cheap test kit is all you need. Ash belongs only on acidic soil, below about 6.5. If your soil already sits at neutral or higher, 7 and above, skip the ash entirely and use the yeast solution on its own. Pile ash onto already alkaline soil and you push the pH too high, which locks up nutrients like iron and turns healthy green leaves a sickly pale yellow, the exact opposite of what you want. Second, never let wood ash mix with a synthetic nitrogen fertilizer. If you use a conventional chemical feed, keep it well clear of the ash. The alkaline ash reacts with that nitrogen and sends it off as ammonia gas, so you lose the nitrogen you paid for and the fumes can burn nearby leaves. Third, don't apply any of this to soggy, waterlogged ground. The whole point is to support living, breathing microbes, and roots need to breathe too. In airless, flooded mud, this only makes things worse, so make sure the bed drains first. Fourth, use only clean, natural ash from untreated firewood. Never ash from painted or pressure-treated lumber, charcoal briquettes, or anything with glue, plastic, or chemicals burned in. Those leave residues you don't want near food you'll eat. And the rule that ties it all together: go easy. A thin ring of ash, a properly watered-down solution, once every couple of weeks. This is no more is better method. It rewards a patient, gentle touch. Section 9. A frontier no-he. I'll leave you with one thought that still stops me in my tracks. A reminder of how much is still being discovered right beneath our boots. Researchers at Rutgers University have described something they call the rhizophagy cycle. And the word means, quite literally, root eating. In the lab, they've watched plant roots pull certain microbes inside their own cells, draw the nutrients out, then send them back into the soil to gather more. They're careful to say they're still working out how much of a plant's diet this accounts for. It's a frontier, not a finished story. But it confirms what the old-timers felt without needing the proof. Good soil isn't dead dirt you pour chemicals into. It's a living partnership between your plants and an entire hidden world. One you can feed with something as plain as a liter of yeasty water. So here's the whole of it, back down to earth. Cucumbers are thirsty, mineral-hungry plants that wear their stress on their sleeves. Pale leaves, bitter fruit, hollow centers. That 1 liter answers them from 2 sides at once. The yeast stirs the living soil to life and helps the plant defend itself, while a thin ring of wood ash lays down the potassium and calcium that firm, sweet cucumbers are built from. If you take one action this week, make it this: test your soil's pH, mix up a single liter tonight, and try it on your cucumbers as they start to flower. Then watch. Within a week or two, you'll often see the newer leaves coming in a deeper green, and the next round of fruit filling out fuller and more even. Let your own garden be the judge. That's the only proof that ever really counts. There's a quiet satisfaction in this, isn't there? Realizing that some of the best answers were never on a store shelf at all. They were in the pantry, in the wood stove, and in the patient know-how of the people who gardened before us. If this gave you something worth trying, I'd be grateful if you'd give it a like so more gardeners can find it. And subscribe to Rooted Grace for more honest, down-to-earth garden wisdom. And I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever put yeast or wood ash to work in your own garden? What did your folks, or your grandparents, swear by? Until next time, may your soil be alive, your hands be happy in the dirt, and your harvest be far better than you ever bargained for.